Welcome to the fifth of my recap videos for the week. You're listening to the account with the report for Saturday, April 15th, or day 416 of the war in Ukraine. As the front lines and general staff reports are outdated, I will be skipping those segments. There were no updates requiring a separate segment. All news updates are grouped into the usual: situation inside Ukraine, the occupied territories, Russia and Belarus, and international developments. To start the news, a look at all the minor updates out of Ukraine. The bodies of 2 more victims of the Russian attack on a 5-story building in Sloviansk, Donetsk Oblast, were retrieved from under the rubble. As of now, the death toll as a result of yesterday's shelling of the city increased to 11 people, another 21 were injured. 6 people died in the destroyed 5-story building. More victims remain under the rubble. Ahead of the next Rammstein-style meeting, the Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov and his team visited Greece, Cyprus, Spain, and Romania for negotiations of weapon deliveries to Ukraine. Additionally, Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov called on partners to consider Russia's transformation. He believes Russia will have to go through denazification, extradite criminals, and compensate for the damage caused. According to the spokesperson for the Air Force Command of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Yuri Inat, Patriot systems will likely arrive in Ukraine after Orthodox Easter celebrated on April 16th. Ukrenergo reported that it will begin exporting electricity to Slovakia on April 17th. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has signed into law sanctions against Russian athletes and a number of other persons and legal entities. Decree number 227/2023 introduced sanctions against 351 persons and legal entities, including Yandex and Rambler, and a number of other Russian IT firms and business owners. Decree number 228/2023 enacted the National Security and Defense Council's decision to introduce sanctions against 87 persons, most of them Russian athletes. A collaborator who has helped direct Russian-caliber missile strikes on Mykolaiv Oblast has been sentenced to 11 years in prison. First detained in August 2022 for posts justifying Russia's war made on pro-Kremlin Telegram channels, investigators found during a search a mobile phone which was used to communicate with Russian forces. A large-scale flood occurred in the regions of Volyn, Rivne, and Cherkasy. Roads, settlements, and more than 10,500 hectare farmland have been inundated. Next up, the latest regarding the situation in the occupied territories. Russian authorities are prohibiting Ukrainians who have not obtained a Russian passport from leaving the occupied territories. At the same time, the National Resistance Center reported that having a Russian passport would avoid such problems in most cases. As reported by Petro Andriuschenko, advisor to the mayor of Mariupol, 2 large explosions were heard in Mariupol in the morning. Authorities in occupied Sevastopol, Crimea, closed marine traffic to set up an anti-submarine sabotage defense. 5 Ukrainians from Russian-occupied Melitopol and Zaporizhia Oblast will appear before a Russian court for allegedly being part of a terrorist group, Russian state-affiliated media reported. The 5 Ukrainians were transported from Melitopol to Crimea and subsequently transferred to the Lefortovo pre-trial detention center in Moscow. Moving on to the news updates from Russia and Belarus. Local media reported that an explosion was heard in the area of a tank training ground in the Russian city of Kazan. A fire reportedly broke out at the site following the explosion. Russia's ambassador to the US, Anatoly Antonov, told Russia's state-controlled Channel 1 that the United States threatened Russia with what he called retaliatory measures if Russia refused to return Wall Street Journal reporter Ivan Gershkovich. Russia has 10 warships on combat duty in the Black Sea, 2 of which are missile carriers with a total salvo of 8 cruise missiles. And to wrap up the news segment, the international developments. The United States has provided $18 billion in budget support to Ukraine through World Bank mechanisms, with nearly $5 billion more to become available in September. Additionally, Japan signed an agreement to give Ukraine $400 million toward reconstruction efforts. The first Danish Leopard 1 main battle tanks will soon be ready to be sent to Ukraine. The relevant statement was made by the Danish Defense Ministry. After a meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva told reporters that the US should stop encouraging war in Ukraine and start talking about peace. The German arms manufacturing company Rheinmetall was the victim of a cyber attack. Rheinmetall stated its automotive sector was attacked, but its military division was not affected. Meanwhile, Canadian Defense Minister Anita Anand announced that recently Russia and Russian-aligned actors have intensified cyberattacks on Ukraine's partners. For example, during the visit of Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal this week, Russian hackers managed to disable the official website of the Canadian Prime Minister. And now for the intelligence report segment, starting as usual with the UK Ministry of Defense. Earlier this week, the State Duma, the Russian parliament's lower house, passed a bill establishing the Unified Registry. This will allow the authorities to serve call-up papers electronically rather than by letter, removing one obstacle which has previously allowed some to dodge the draft. Russia's creation of a unified registry of those eligible for military service does not necessarily indicate a second wave of mobilization of conscripts for the war against Ukraine. A look at the assessment by the Institute for the Study of War. The Kremlin is likely attempting to portray Russia as an equal defense partner with China ahead of Chinese Defense Minister Li Shangfu's visit to Moscow from April 16th to 18th. The Kremlin is likely hoping to make itself more attractive to China by launching Russian Pacific Fleet exercises to project Russia's naval power in the Pacific. The Kremlin also likely intends to use the Pacific Fleet's combat readiness checks to attempt to deter further Japanese support for Ukraine ahead of the G7 meeting from May 19th to 21st. The Russian military is in no position to threaten Japan at this time. Wagner Group financier Yevgeny Prigozhin is setting information conditions to exploit a Russian military failure if the planned Ukrainian counteroffensive is successful. Prigozhin explicitly rejected the notion of any negotiations to end the war and urged Russians to continue fighting, even if it results in Russia's temporary defeat. The Russian nationalist discourse about the acceptability of Russia suffering defeat in Ukraine deviates from some Western assertions of the need to preserve Russia from humiliation and allow Russia to save face. Former Russian officer and ardent nationalist Igor Girkin denied speculations that he is facing charges in St. Petersburg for the discreditation of the Russian armed forces. A denial that likely further indicates his protection by unknown Siloviki patrons. Wagner Group financier Yevgeny Prigozhin may be attempting to apply pressure on Girkin's patronage networks by responding to accusations against Girkin. Russian elite forces are diluting their combat effectiveness with poorly trained mobilized personnel and volunteers due to high casualties sustained in Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin will likely host his annual June press conference in early June 2023. The Russian State Duma is intensifying its efforts to censor Russian cultural figures who fled Russia and criticized the war, likely aimed at encouraging domestic self-censorship. And that concludes the recap. If you're interested in any of the articles and want to read up on the details, you can find links to them in the description. If you enjoyed the report and found it informative, please consider sharing it with others and giving me a like. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini.